Andrew Wilson obliterates this guy's absurd claim that there's a wokeright in a fiery debate, dismantling every point made by a dude calling himself the Misfit Patriot. Wilson tears through the argument with pure logic, exposing how outmatched this guy really is. Let's dive in.
There's a duck, right? And the duck is the woke left. The woke right is walking like the duck. It's talking like the duck. It's quacking like the fucking duck. And we're going, hey, that looks like a fucking duck.
Yeah,
right?
but
that's what we're doing.
I understand what you're saying, but it doesn't. Again, I've reduced this already, so you can see it a million times. They're not actually quacking like the duck. What they're doing is they're rejecting the ideology of equity and inclusion. Both of these tenets.
Woke right is just trans. They're just like, they just look a little bit like the woke left.
They don't even look like them. You just have a failure of pinpointing the distinction in ideologies, and that's why like no leftist, no woke leftist is going to consider these groups to be woke. They only jump on board with that because they feel like it's a humiliation ritual for them that's brought on by guys like you. They don't really think, though, for a second that these guys are about intersectional equity. Of course not. It's ridiculous.
No, so they're just acting. What I get your argument. Your argument is there's no woke left in a literal sense because the woke. The woke right. Yeah. There's no woke right in a literal sense because if you reduce it down to equity,
to ideology.
Well, if you said equity, right?
Yeah, but I'm just saying the ideology reduces to equity.
Yeah. No, I think what you're doing is, and you're making a good argument because left, right? Left is equity, right? And right is different. So you have a problem with using the word woke
because it's not a good descriptor. Well, reactionary would be a good descriptor.
Woke comes from waking up, right? Waking up. That's why it's woke. Waking up to the fact that there is some power. There is some power over us that we need to overthrow, and we need to take back the power because now there's this power structure. You're focusing on the left in woke left, not the woke in woke left.
Yeah, right? But listen, this started from black leadership who was talking about an oppressor class who was oppressing them. And what equity needed to look like for them. Equity that's the main tenet is equity. But the dissident right, ideologically reduced, rejects categorically the idea of equity. They even reject categorically the idea of egalitarianism.
But that's the left argument, right? So the left argument is the equity argument, right? Woke just means you are waking up, quote, woke, wake, right? Waking up to an oppressor-oppressed class, right?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't mean that. The etymology of the word comes from the black leadership saying that equity is the necessary. They woke up to the fact they needed equity. Equity was the key point here for all of these woke leftists. If you talk to any, and I've done hundreds of debates with left-wingers across the country, right? I know that you would love to categorize me and say, Andrew just debates with whores on the internet, but the most prominent left-wingers in the world I've tangled with on these topics time and time and time again. The reduction in the argument for ideology from the right comes down to this. We reject social inclusivity and equity. We reject it. From the left, it comes down and is reduced to we demand it. We demand inclusivity and equity. That's the distinction between the two groups. You would find yourself more on what you consider to be the woke right side than you would the woke left side, in fact. Don't you think equity and inclusion is fucking stupid? Don't you think that necessarily is fucking stupid?
Yeah, of course I do.
Yeah, so does every dissident right-winger who exists. The idea, though, that they are identitarians because they're reactionaries, right? And they say things like, oh, we don't want unfettered illegal immigration in here. Does that mean that they're racist? No, of course not. Does that mean that they're evil? No, of course not.
No, that doesn't
but they're definitely identitarians.
That does not mean that they're evil. What they are that does not mean that they're racist. They just are fucking racist, right? That's the thing. Anybody with a set of eyes can see that this group, right? And I love how you just went through a whole entire reduction argument and then said, well, you can reduce me down to arguing with hookers. I reduce your arguments down.
No. I said I think you would love to categorize me as that, not a reduction.
I reduce your arguments down to the way that you argue with people, right? Which is basically reducing everything down to the simplest set, right? Which is your debate tactic, and I get it.
It's not a tactic. That's just logic.
Let me know what you think, folks. But to me, this guy's clearly in over his head. Andrew Wilson is on a whole different level when it comes to debating, and he's not using tricks or flashy rhetoric. He's just laying down straight logic. Step by step, When it comes to the so-called woke, it really boils down to two things: DEI and equity. That's the core of it. And let's be real. We didn't come up with the term woke to mock them. They called themselves that. The woke left embraced the label, wore it like a badge, and all anyone else did was say, okay, those are the woke folks. Now look at the nonsense they're pushing. Once they branded themselves, it didn't take much to highlight the chaos tied to that identity. But now you've got this guy, the Misfit Patriot, trying to argue there's a woke right? Come on. Who on the right is acting, sounding, or pushing anything that even remotely mirrors the woke left? I haven't seen it. Have you? Drop it in the comments if you think otherwise. Smash that like button if you're enjoying the breakdown. And let's jump back in.
That's how you debate.
That's logic, though.
So your logical debate tactic.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, just logical. It's just logic, right?
You're logical.
Well, so when you take logic, you're taking a set of propositions, and because of the law of excluded middle, they're either true or false. So it's either true that the woke right is the same as the woke left, or it's not true. I'm fundamentally saying it's untrue, and then I take the second proposition.
Well, nobody's ever made that.
They have the same tenets. That's the second argument. I reject that as untrue and give my evidence for it. So I have now taken these logical propositions, which must be either true or false, and shown how both are false.
You haven't. That's the thing, right? And I was just about to say what you have done is you have pointed out the distinction between left and right. And I am telling you, right, that there is the woke. Just because the black leadership started the woke movement. Right, and you have to understand, we gave the title of woke to them, right? We're like they gave
themselves that title.
I say as a pejorative. We sort of
they gave themselves that title though.
We use it as an insult. Would you argue that point? The right uses woke.
Well, yeah, far later actually, but yes.
Yeah. Okay, so the right gave this title as a sort of a categorization against separating the moderate left, liberals, and the progressives, the radical progressives.
No, it's right? It's a tenet of all leftists.
Sure, but what I'm saying is every normal person thinks that there is a difference between, let's say, I don't know, like Christian cinema and Ilhan Omar, right? One's woke and the other one's not exactly woke. Right, like, and I get it that every leftist is woke to a degree. However, when you give this group a name, right, you don't have to reduce it to a literal sense. You're basically going, these are the categories of this group. Woke left is a radical group of progressives that focus on identity, politics, and race. Right. What we're saying is on the right, it's a radical group of extremists that focus on identity and race. Right. The difference being the hyperfixation on race is there. The hyperfixation on victim mentality is there. The hyperfixation on cancel culture, exclusion and coercion is there. Those tenets are just present in the group. And because those things are present, no matter how they're defined literally, they are present, then we are just calling it the same thing with a different name. We're calling woke left these tenets, which they have, woke right, these tenets which they have. Now you're making the argument, but everybody has those tenets, and that's when I come back in with it's kind of like really like something that you don't have to explain. You just see it, right? It's like there is a clear difference between the Groyper movement and the MAGA movement. I think that's very prevalent.
I think that they would agree, but that would not. But here's why you're having trouble here with the distinction.
I'm not
woke right and woke left. I would say that the woke right is a group which hyper-focuses on using the English language to make political points in the United States, and that the woke left is a group which hyper-focuses on the English language to make political points in the United States. See, they're exactly the same. Do you see? No, they're exactly the same. They both use the English language in order to make political points in the United States. So they're exactly the same thing, right?
Hitler drank water,
that's my whole point. When you create a descriptor, right? The descriptor is supposed to point at the behavioral patterns, which you can then dictate based on the ideology. Mm-hmm. You have two distinct ideologies you're looking at here. One, which is using the prismatic of elevation through equity, and the other, which rejects it. You saying that because both can focus on racial consciousness or things like that due to grievances, that would be every group which exists on Earth. Every single group which exists on Earth is going to have some case of racial consciousness, in-group consciousness, in-group think. All of them, because all politics are identitarian. You just making the claim that both groups have a set of racial consciousness doesn't actually put them in the same category, unless you're going to admit that because they both make language, the English language, a hyperfixation so that they can make political points, they're exactly the same group. That doesn't make any sense, right?
I think Andrew Wilson made a killer argument here. Breaking things down to their core means identifying the underlying principles, the real foundation. And this guy, the Misfit Patriot, I honestly have no clue how he's trying. To argue there's any kind of wokeism on the right. Just because some folks on the right talk about certain issues doesn't mean they're coming from the same worldview or pushing the same outcomes as the woke left. Different intent, different behavior, and completely different consequences. Talking about similar topics doesn't magically make both sides the same. That's a lazy surface level argument. I can't even believe Andrew Wilson had to spell this out for him. It's almost embarrassing how one-sided this debate is. Let me know in the comments. Do you see any real signs of wokeism on the right? Anything that even remotely justifies slapping that label on conservatives? Because to me it's just nonsense. And this idea that people concerned about borders or immigration are now suddenly being branded as racists or wokeright? That's just absurd. I've never seen this Misfit Patriot guy before, but based on this debate, he's not even close to Andrew Wilson's level. Drop your thoughts down below on Wilson's takedown of this ridiculous argument. Hit that like button if you enjoyed the breakdown, and don't forget to subscribe. I'll catch you in the next one.